Tonight, a special edition of Trial Story, Massachusetts versus Louise Woodward. This documentary was originally produced for Channel 4 in Great Britain and aired throughout the United Kingdom on the night of the verdict.
This is the jury room in Massachusetts where 12 men and women have been sitting for 2.5 days trying to decide whether a young English girl is guilty of murder. Not since the O.J. Simpson trial have the American and British public become so engrossed in a criminal case. A 19-year-old English au pair suddenly thrust into the limelight, accused of murdering a 9-month-old boy. It was a courtroom drama that sparked a wide-ranging debate on both sides of the Atlantic. On trial alongside Louise was a childcare system that allows teenagers with little or no training to be placed in charge of vulnerable infants. It was also a case that divided the two nations. In America, many saw Louise as a cold-hearted killer, a woman who spent too much time out on the town when she should have been caring for her young charges. But in Britain, anger was directed at the American judicial system. The case would never have got this far had it been held here, some said.
Nice to see you.
Nowhere was the belief in Louise's innocence more solid than in her home village of Elton.
This morning we continue to think of Louise in prison in Boston.
The community rallied round, raising some £13,000 to help her mother visit her daughter in the prison near Boston, where she was being held without bail, pending the trial.
That Louise Woodward, on or about the 4th day of February, in the year of our Lord 1997 at Newton, in the county of Middlesex aforesaid, did assault and beat Matthew Eappen, with intent to murder him, and by such assault and beating did kill and murder Matthew Eappen.
At issue for the jury was exactly what happened at the home of Deborah and Sunil Eappen in the wealthy Boston suburb of Newton. The Eappens, both doctors, had gone to work, leaving Matthew and his elder brother in the care of Louise, the au pair they'd taken on about 3 months earlier. At 3:45 p.m, the police received an emergency call. Matthew had been taken ill, a panicking Louise told them. He was rushed to hospital where doctors operated to remove a large blood clot on his brain. Matthew never regained consciousness. He died 5 days later after his parents decided to switch off their son's life support machine. On October the 7th, the trial opened at the Superior Court in Newton, Massachusetts. It was 8 months since Matthew's death, 8 months that Louise had been held without bail at the state women's prison. The prosecuting and defense attorneys used their opening arguments to present totally different versions of what had led up to Matthew's death.
A 2.5-inch skull fracture to the back of Mattie's head, a massively swollen brain pressing against the sides of his skull, bloody retinal hemorrhaging in the area of his head between the eyes and the brain. These injuries were not caused by someone being a little rough. These injuries were not caused by a toss on the bed or a drop to the floor. These injuries weren't caused by a gentle revival shaking. These injuries were caused by a violent slam against a hard object causing that skull fracture, which eventually killed Matthew 5 days later. A violent slam against a hard object and severe full-on shaking so that baby's head went back and forth, shearing the veins inside of his head, causing the retinal hemorrhaging. Actions that anyone would know would cause a little 8-month-old boy to die.
The government has just told you that on February 4th of this year, Louise Woodward slammed Matthew Eappen's head down on a hard surface. And that you'll hear their witnesses claim that this force, this slamming, was the equivalent of dropping this baby on his head from a height of 15 feet from a second-story window onto concrete. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that that did not happen. Their witnesses will also tell you, as Mr. Leone has mentioned, that they claim that Louise Woodward took Matthew Eappen and shook him for a full minute. Shook him. That, ladies and gentlemen, is less than 10 seconds. The evidence in this case is going to show you that that never happened.
The prosecution had always insisted that their case was built around forensic evidence. Numerous experts had been brought in to testify that the skull fracture occurred within hours of Matthew's arrival at the Boston Children's Hospital.
To explain the injuries that I operated on directly, the subdural hematoma, the skull fracture, and the brain swelling, would have required a forcible hit of the head against some blunt surface. To explain the retinal hemorrhages, there would have to be an additional shaking or swinging of the head in some fashion.
That the magnitude of the findings on the CT indicate that the injury must have been imposed within minutes to a few hours of that CT scan.
The doctors who first saw Matthew that day immediately suspected they had encountered a case of child abuse. They notified the police that the injury seemed recent and could have occurred that morning. Sergeant William Byrne of the Newton Police Department was sent to the Eappen home to investigate.
She said that he was cranky and that he was crying and he was fussy.
And did she tell you about the bath?
She did.
What did she indicate occurred prior to the bath?
She said that she carried the child into the bedroom area.
By the child, you mean Matthew?
Sorry, Matthew. And by her own words, she tossed him on the bed.
And did you ask her to demonstrate for you what she meant by tossed?
I did.
And what did she do and say at that point?
She said, tossed, tossed, and with her hand she made a forward movement as if tossing something.
Now, did she indicate for you what she did after she tossed Matthew on the bed?
She said that she went into the bathroom area to draw the bath and that she laid a towel on the floor.
Now, did she indicate at that point, after she laid the towel on the floor, what she did with regard to Matthew?
She said that she returned and got Matthew and brought him into the bathroom area. She told me that she dropped him on the towel, which was on the floor.
Did you ask her to demonstrate for you how she dropped Matthew on the towel that was on the floor?
I did.
And what did she do and say at that point in response to your question?
She said, I dropped him. I dropped him, and again, with her hands, she made a movement.
Now, after she indicated to you that she had tossed Matthew on the bed and dropped him on the floor, did you ask her any questions about her demeanor that day?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did she respond to you?
Yes, sir.
What did she say?
In response to my question, were you angry or mad, she said that she was angry and she was frustrated and just crying.
Did she say why she was angry and frustrated?
She told me that he was crying and cranky all day. She told me that she may have been a little rough with him, or she was rough with him. I distinctly remember her saying the part that she was rough with the child, or she may have been rough with the child.
Sergeant Byrne left the house telling his colleagues that he was willing to give Louise the benefit of the doubt. But that was not the case with the next witness, Dr. Deborah Eappen, Matthew's mother. Her role was to buttress a central theme in the prosecution case, that Louise had become resentful of the Eappens and had neglected the children, being too interested in the Boston nightlife. The state wanted to show that despite Louise's protestations, she had made no effort to become part of the family, which had produced tensions from the very beginning.
Now, during the first month, She began November 18th, right? During the first month, how many evenings was she home with you?
During the first month, despite the fact that she wanted to be part of a family, she only stayed home one night.
As December approached, specifically mid-December, were you having any problems with Louise Woodward concerning her child care habits?
The problems that started coming out within the first month were that she just could not be ready in the morning. She was not up on time. She wasn't ready to take the kids. She started having later and later nights. Mid-December, one night she stayed out till 1:30 that I knew of, and I was very concerned. And that same week, she was late in the morning at least 3 times. The main problems that we had were her late nights, her inability to be ready in the morning, and leaving the children unattended and doing personal things when she should be taking care of the children.
And can you describe the discussion as it took place with the defendant at that time?
Yes. Before we even got into any of the specifics, I said, you know, before we waste time on each thing, either you're staying or you're going. You know, we have to work this out one way or the other because we can't keep going on like this.
Did she respond to that?
She seemed nervous and concerned that we were going to fire her.
That was the day of Matthew's injury. For Deborah Eappen, it was an uneventful day until a call from Louise at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
What did she say to you at that time?
She said, "It's Matthew. I think he's choked on his vomit."
Did you have further conversation with her that time about Matthew?
And I said, "Did you do the abdominal thrust and the back thrust like we talked about?" And she said, "No." She said, "He was breathing funny." And I said, "Did you give him breaths?" And she said, "I tried, but he sounded gurgly." I said, "Did you call 911 right away?" And she said, "No, I paged Sonny 3 times and then you."
By the time of that conversation, Matthew was already on his way to the Children's Hospital in Boston. There, Deborah met up with her husband, Sunil.
One of the emergency room physicians said that they had an ophthalmologist look at his eyes and that it looked like there was bleeding in his eyes. And I knew what that meant, and I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it unless I saw it. And I asked if I could take a quick look while they were arranging the CAT scan.
What Deborah couldn't believe was that her son was showing all the signs of a massive blow to the head. From the emergency room, she called Louise to find out what could have caused it.
I asked, "Did he fall down the stairs?" "No." "Did he fall in the tub?" "No." Did you leave him in the high chair?" "No, I didn't use the high chair all day." You know, I was looking for any possible accident or explanation. And at the end I said, "Did you shake him?" And she said, "Yes," when he wasn't breathing normally.
The prosecution concluded its case by calling Matthew's father, Dr. Sunil Eappen. The intent was to bring the case back to what they were convinced was the violent death of a 9-month-old child. It produced the most emotionally charged testimony of the trial.
January, sir, if I could direct your attention to the week of January 19th through the 25th. Were you still having these problems with the defendant concerning late nights and inability to get up in the morning?
That's correct.
And can you describe what happened for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury when you came home at 5 o'clock that day?
Sure. I came home, and when I opened the door, I found Brendan was in our family room, which is immediately on the left as we walk in. He was watching TV, and I didn't see Matthew and Louise. I just presumed they had gone upstairs to change his diaper or something. And I continued on after I spoke to Brendan for a little while and asked him how his day was. Went back into the kitchen, and I found Matthew in the dining room lying alone. In the meantime, I heard some noise downstairs in the basement, so I just hung out there until about 5 minutes exactly by the clock was done. And I wanted to wait longer, but I was just getting more and more angry, and I yelled downstairs for her to come up.
And at that time, did you have a discussion with her?
I did. I said, I was really angry, and I said I found this behavior to be completely unacceptable, that she just cannot leave the kids alone. for any period of time like that, and that she was down there for a long time. And when she came upstairs, she looked me right in the eye and said that, you know, she just went downstairs, less than a minute. And right then she said, you know, she told me that she was very upset and that she can't talk about it right now, that she was going to start crying. And I said, you know, it's okay to cry. That would be okay. But she said, I can't talk about it right now. And I said, all right. So she went back downstairs for a little while and came back up. And I said, do you want to talk about this now? And she says, well, I have someplace to go. I said, Louise, this is really important. I mean, is there something you're not understanding about what's going on here? And she said, you know, I was only down there for a minute, and you're really blowing this way out of proportion, and I feel like you're yelling at me about this. And I said, this is really important. This is the essence of why you're here, is to keep the kids safe.
For the Eappens, that incident was the final straw. 2 days later, a meeting was held at which Louise was told her continued employment depended on accepting new strict rules that included a curfew.
Basically, she had to agree to all of these statements, which she did, and that was a contingency as to what she was going to be staying with.
And did she agree to do that?
She did agree.
Dr. Eappen then spoke of the telephone call he received from Deborah telling him what had happened to Matthew.
I literally hung up the phone and I ran over to the children's emergency room. Matthew wasn't there yet when I got there, and I waited by the ambulance bay for him to come up, and I saw the ambulance drive up. The first thing I saw was Matthew lying there, and the EMTs were breathing for him, and he looked fine. Other than that, just wasn't breathing. And they had a bag and mask that he was squeezing, and they brought him into the emergency room, into the trauma room, and I just sort of followed him in. And then, you know, there was a flurry of activity. Everyone was working on him, trying to put in IVs, examine him, and I was just sort of praying as hard as I could that everything would be okay. And they were asking me questions about, you know, Matthew's health and his allergies, and, you know, if he was otherwise healthy.
At some point, did you see your wife, Debbie?
For 5 days, Matthew clung to life. On February the 9th, the family gathered in his room to say goodbye.
My parents were present, my sister, Debbie's parents, and Brendan.
What happened then, sir?
We, actually there was also a priest who we had called in, and we just, we prayed, got communion, and we decided that we'd all hold Matthew, and we stopped the ventilator and just held him. And Matthew died while I was holding him.
Matthew Eappen died at 6:05 p.m. The next morning, Louise Woodward was charged with his murder. On October the 17th, the defense began to present its case. The lawyers knew they had the task of painting Louise in a totally different light to erase the impression that she was self-centered, dishonest, and capable of murder. To demonstrate Louise's nice girl-next-door qualities, the defense called several character witnesses. Their first was Elizabeth Ford, Louise's former headmistress.
Do you have an opinion as to her reputation in the community, this is the school community, for being law-abiding?
Yes, Louise didn't break any school rules. She was always extremely good pupil.
And in case I missed it, and her reputation for truth and veracity?
It was without question that she was always honest and straightforward with us.
Louise's former headmistress was followed by the Reverend John Hodgson.
Do you have an opinion concerning Louise Woodward's reputation in her community for peacefulness and nonviolence?
Yes, I do.
Would you tell the jury what that opinion is, please?
That Louise Woodward is an extremely peaceful and non-violent person.
Based upon those conversations, do you have an opinion as to whether, as to her reputation in that community as a law-abiding person?
Louise Woodward's reputation in that community, based upon my conversations, is that she is an extremely law-abiding person.
And finally, sir, based upon those conversations, do you have an opinion concerning her reputation in the community for truth and veracity?
Absolutely. She is...
And what is that opinion, sir?
That she is an extremely truthful person. Extremely.
No further questions, Your Honor.
It was left to Louise's mother to describe the relationship she observed when she stayed with the Eappen family just after Christmas.
Where did you stay while you were in this country?
I stayed with the Eappen family. I shared Louise's bedroom. In fact, we shared a bed.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to observe how your daughter was doing in her job?
She was doing very well. She was very happy.
Did anybody discuss with you any problems your daughter was having?
Not at all, no.
The defense then started its assault on the state's medical case. What they wanted to prove was that Matthew Eappen's injury was not the result of a violent blow. Neither had it been caused by violent shaking, and they used a succession of witnesses to establish that, for every prosecution expert, there was an equal and opposite defense expert. Among them was Dr. Jan Leisman.
Doctor, have you reviewed the autopsy findings?
Yes.
Have you reviewed the pictures at autopsy?
Yes.
Have you reviewed the medical records in this case?
Yes.
Have you reviewed the x-rays?
Yes.
All right. Doctor, what is your opinion? Do you have an opinion, I guess again, to a reasonable degree of scientific and medical certainty, based on the records you've reviewed and your expertise and your review of other cases, as to whether or not Matthew Eappen, on the morning or afternoon of February 4th, was shaken back and forth violently for about a minute with his head snapping back and forth? Do you have an opinion?
I do.
And what is your opinion?
That didn't happen.
One essential part of shaking, if shaking is in place, is damage to the neck. Unless you have damage to the cervical system, you cannot produce the effects on the brain.
Were there such injuries in this case?
There were no injuries in this case.
Dr. Jean, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to whether Matthew Eappen was shaken violently on February 4th with his neck snapping back and forth uncontrollably?
Yes, I have an opinion.
And what is that opinion? Please tell the jury.
That did not happen.
In this autopsy of this child, do you see anything that you've just described that you ordinarily see when you have severe shaking?
I see no evidence of neck injury at all.
Of the kind you were describing?
Correct.
Okay.
Dr. Elsa Jean had examined Matthew's brain scan and found that it was not consistent with a recent injury, but could have happened as much as a month earlier.
In my experience, looking at skull fractures on a daily basis, they have scalp soft tissue swelling when they're new. When they're old, the scalp soft tissue swelling can go away. But a new skull fracture declares itself on the CT images with evidence of scalp soft tissue swelling.
Now, even in terms of orders of magnitude of impact, okay, is there, in your opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, any basis for believing that this bone window, Exhibit 38, could be in the form that it is now if this child had been slammed against a fixed hard surface with the velocity of impact approaching a drop from 15 feet onto a fixed hard surface?
Absolutely not.
Dr. Lawrence Thibault then summarized the defense's case.
Matthew Eappen did not suffer a violent impact to the head, and certainly not on February 4th.
We called Louise Woodward, Your Honor.
At 10:33 on the morning of October the 23rd, 11 days into the trial, the jury heard from the one witness they most wanted to assess. The defense was taking a risk by exposing Louise to cross-examination.
I solemnly swear that the testimony she gives the court and jury in the case now on trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
As promised in opening statements, Louise Woodward waived her right to remain silent and took the stand to proclaim her innocence.
Ms. Woodward, did you ever shake Matthew Eappen violently?
No.
Did you ever hit Matthew?
No.
Did you ever slam Matthew about the head?
No.
Did you ever slam him at all?
No.
Did you do anything to hurt Matthew Eappen?
Never.
Louise insisted that despite differences with the parents, she was devoted to the children.
We did a lot of make-believe. You know, we'd dance to music. He liked to sing. He sang a lot. Brendan liked to read too. We used to read with Matthew. Matthew would look at the pictures, and we did all sorts of things. And Maddie was really a placid baby, so he'd laugh along if we were being active. If we were dancing, I used to hold him and dance with Brendan.
She testified that Deborah Eappen had never been clear about her responsibilities, that this confusion had resulted in the January incident when Sulin Eappen arrived home to find Matthew alone on the family room floor.
He was chewing some toys, and I was emptying the dishwasher, and I was talking to him and, just trying to get the house tidy for when Sunil came home. And the basement door is always kept open. It's in the kitchen, so to let the heat rise, and I could hear that the washing machine had stopped. So I wanted to go downstairs and put the laundry from the washing machine into the dryer. So I went and did that.
Okay, and did you do anything else while you were in the basement other than just move the wash from the washer to the dryer?
No.
And when you completed doing that, what did you do?
I came back upstairs.
And when you did, what occurred?
I saw Sunil standing there, and he was very unhappy that I had left Matthew to go downstairs. I said I was only down there a minute. I only changed the laundry over. So we had. I was getting upset because he was mad, and I said to him, I'm really confused as to what my duties are. I don't know when I should do the things that you want me to do, and I've been told different things by both parents, so I didn't know what I was supposed to do and when I was supposed to do it. I suggested that we have at a meeting that he would write down for me his expectations of me, what he wanted me to do.
The court broke for lunch before getting to the heart of the case. It was during the afternoon session that she was finally asked to explain what had happened on February the 4th.
I put a toy into his crib that he liked. It was a musical caterpillar that you pull out, and it played You Are My Sunshine. And I put that on him, and I went into the bathroom.
And was he lying on his stomach or on his back when you did that?
He was on his back.
And you said you went in to wash your hands. And what happened next?
He'd stopped crying when I put him in the crib. So I went back and I looked into the crib, and he was unresponsive. He was lying there. His eyes were half closed. He wasn't focusing. He was gasping for breath. He was kind of like this, and he looked kind of off color. So he didn't look right.
When you say off color, can you tell us what you mean?
Kind of blue, kind of bluish.
And was there anything else about him that you said that he didn't look right?
Well, his eyes were half closed, and that he wasn't looking at me. That he was just staring up.
And so what was your response on seeing him like that?
I was very frightened. I panicked. And I picked him up out of the crib, and when I did, he vomited on me. Or something came out of his mouth.
After he vomited, what did you do?
I thought that he had choked. So I lay him down on the floor, and I put my finger inside his mouth. We'd been through CPR, Debbie and Sunil and I, because they told me in case anything happened to the kids, if they choked, what I should do. So I felt inside his mouth and I couldn't, there was nothing there. So I tilted his head back and I tried to give him CPR. I tried to breathe for him. I lay him on the bed and I started screaming his name. And I was clapping around his head and I was trying to see if he could see me. And I was waving my hand in front of his face. He didn't respond. He wasn't responsive at all. He didn't do anything. So I took him, I picked him up and I went downstairs with him. And I laid him down on the dining room floor. And I went to the phone and I tried to page Sonny.
As testimony continued, Louise described how she called for an ambulance, and then how later in the evening, as the extent of Matthew's head injuries became apparent to the doctor at the hospital, she was visited by Sergeant Byrne.
Did Sergeant Byrne say anything to you when you first saw him?
He said that they'd come to get information for the doctors, and he wanted me, would I be willing to talk about the day with him? I said, of course. He read me my Miranda rights. He said that he wasn't arresting me. It was, just a precaution. It was that he always did that. He liked to read the rights to people.
Now, during the course of that conversation, were there a lot of questions about what took place while you were getting Matthew ready to take a bath?
Yeah, Byrne kind of focused in on that. Went to the bathroom and he got a teddy bear. Well, I think Downey went out and got a teddy bear. They brought it back. And they wanted me to show how he put the teddy bear down on the bathroom floor.
And
sorry, how he put Matthew down on the bathroom floor, but using the teddy bear.
And did you demonstrate that with the teddy bear?
Yeah, I did that for him.
Now, at any time during that interview, did you tell these police officers that you had tossed Matthew Eappen onto the bed?
No.
Did you tell them that you dropped Matthew on the floor?
No.
Now, did the phrase being rough with him come up?
Yes.
And what do you now remember about the phrase being rough with Matthew during that interview?
Well, the officers were talking, and I think Apocrypha said he had a nephew, and that he knew how frustrating it would be to hear a baby crying constantly. He knew that that must be very frustrating for me to have to hear that. And Downing agreed with him. They said to me, so maybe you were just a little rough with him. It must have been frustrating for you. Maybe you were a little rough. And I said, well, maybe I wasn't as gentle with him as I could have been, because I was trying to get the bath over with fairly quickly because he was tired. So I told him that maybe I wasn't as gentle with him as I could have been. And what I meant was that I was being kind of quicker than usual.
Okay. Now, did you ever say that, or agree with them when they used this phrase that you may have been a little rough with them?
I guess I agreed with them. I mean, I didn't mean that, but...
And were you actually rough with Matthew?
I don't think so.
Were you asked specifically whether Matthew struck his head?
Yes.
And what did you tell them?
I told him I didn't think he had. I don't think so. Ben said, but it's possible, isn't it, that he may have when you put him in the bath, maybe. I said maybe, but I don't think so. I was pretty sure about that.
So just to sum up here, Ms. Woodward, did you ever hit Matthew Eappen?
No.
Did you see Matthew Eappen's head become injured?
No.
And did you slam Matthew Eappen?
No.
And did you do anything to hurt Matthew Eappen?
No, I didn't.
I have no further questions.
The trial adjourned on Thursday night, leaving Louise to wait 3 full days before the beginning of cross-examination from the prosecutor, Gerard Leone. On Monday, the prosecution zeroed in on what Louise had told Sergeant Byrne of the Newton Police. Hadn't she admitted dropping Matthew onto the floor, then tossing him onto the bed?
He was sitting next to me on the sofa.
And you never said that you tossed Maddie on the bed. Never said that.
No, I said I popped him on the bed.
Popped him on the bed?
That's just an English word. It means I popped him onto the bed.
You told us on Thursday that you laid him on the bed. Did you pop him on the bed? Did you lay him on the bed? Or did you toss him on the bed?
Popped and laid are the same thing.
They are.
To me, yes.
What word did you use to the Newton police?
I think I said I popped him on the bed.
Oh, so that's why they might have thought you said toss. Pop sounds kind of like toss, huh?
I don't know. That's what I just tell you that's what I told them.
When they asked you if you dropped them on the floor, did you say you popped them on the floor?
I don't know.
That might have been a reason why they thought you said dropped if you said popped, huh? Because that sounds similar, right?
I don't know what they would have thought.
But in any event, you never said you dropped.
I never said I dropped him. And I didn't show him that I dropped him.
I'm sorry?
I didn't show Sergeant Byrne that I dropped Matthew.
I didn't ask you that, but I'll ask you that now. So you never demonstrated to Sergeant Byrne how you dropped Matthew?
I demonstrated how I put the baby down on the floor.
And when you demonstrated that for him, did you tell him this is how I popped the baby down on the floor?
I don't know what words I used. I demonstrated and my fingers were touching the floor. I demonstrated like I did.
Well, I saw that on Thursday, but the word you used on Thursday was I told the Newton police that I laid the baby on the futon and I laid the baby on the floor. Did you or did you not use those words?
I don't know what words I used. It means the same thing to me.
But it could have been popped instead of laid.
It could have been. That's a word I use.
What about bang? When you had a conversation about banging the head on the floor. Do you remember that part of the conversation?
Sergeant Byrne asked me, could he have hit his head? He said, it's possible, isn't it?
And when Sergeant Byrne said, is it possible whether he could have hit his head, your response was, he may have banged his head when I dropped him to the floor, wasn't it?
No.
What did you say in response to Sergeant Byrne at that time?
I said, it's possible, but I don't think so.
When you went to check on him at 12:30, you were worried about him at that time, weren't you?
Did I find him in the crib at 12:30? That worried me?
Yeah, you're worried about him.
I was worried that he wasn't eating enough.
Well, you hadn't heard from him. That was unusual to you, so you were worried. So you went to check on him.
Yes. I just went to see, what happened to him, why he hadn't called me.
Had you shaken him at all before that time that day?
No.
And when you clapped and you called and you ran around with Matthew Eappen upstairs, that's because you wanted him to be okay, right?
I was trying to get him to respond to me.
That's because you realized what you had done at that point. Isn't that true, ma'am?
No, it's not. I didn't know what was wrong with him.
Matthew was rushed to the hospital on your watch and due to your 911 call, right?
Yes.
And there was no one else upstairs in that house at 33 Beamuth Road who knows what happened besides yourself and Matty Eappen, right?
Yes.
And the last time Matty looked at you before becoming totally unresponsive, looked scared and shocked, didn't he?
No, that's not what I said.
I have nothing further.
With the evidence phase of the trial now over, the judge said that the state was willing to make an offer to include, in addition to 2 counts of murder in the first and second degree, the charge of manslaughter, which would result in a substantially lower sentence. That option might appeal to a jury unwilling to convict on the more serious counts.
The difference is that if the government fails to prove murder, but does prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you're guilty of manslaughter, you can be convicted of the intermittent offense if it is offered to the jury as an option. If the jury has no choice, then you will either be convicted of some degree of murder or you will be acquitted. You understand? What is your choice?
I choose the first option. So, the 2 degrees of murder. on acquittal.
Louise had decided she would go for all or nothing. It was then left to both sides to present their closing arguments.
This is a woman who has told you and anyone else who would listen and not distort what she had to say, the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. This is not a murderer. This is not a child killer. This is a child lover. You saw that come through when she testified. She can't help it. The love of children comes right out. This is an innocent person. But the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is that Louise Woodward had the colossal misfortune to be with Matthew Eappen when this old injury caused him to fail and that the bleeding wouldn't stop. And she was the one who happened to be there at that time. Nothing more, nothing less. So I ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, don't put your finger anywhere near that lever. And when Mr. Lawyer Kono asks you, how do you find Louise Woodward? Please say, because the evidence tells you you must, that Louise Woodward is not guilty. And I thank you very much.
And as she's trying to do this bath, she's got a slippery, wet, fussy, cranky Matty Eappen. You think she's happy now? Matty keeps crying, and she can't stand it. And as Matty keeps crying, what does she do? She takes Matty out. Okay, bath's over. And she told you, she cut the bath short. Bath's over because she can't stand the crying and fussing. What does she do? Takes him out, puts him in his little Mickey Mouse suit. And what's happening? Matty Eappen is still crying. He's fussy, he's cranky, and she can't stand it. So she grabs Matty Eappen, and she shakes him, because it worked earlier. Stop crying. Matty Eappen doesn't stop crying. You know why? He's 8 months old, and he doesn't know that to shake means stop crying. So she shakes him a little more, and Matty Eappen keeps crying, he keeps fussing, and she keeps shaking, but it ain't working. And Matty Eappen is still crying and fussing until she now takes him and she slams his head down. Matty Eappen's not crying anymore. Now what happens? Remember the half-truths, half-lies? What does she tell you she does? She puts him in the crib. Oh, what did I do? What did I do? Now she starts thinking about it. She's upstairs. Brendan's downstairs in front of the video. Matty's in the crib. His little brain's starting to swell against his skull. What does she do now? What does she tell you she does? Comes back to the crib. What does she see? Half-truths, half-lies. He's unresponsive. She picks him up. Bet she picks him up. Matty, wake up. Matty, wake up. His eyes roll back in his head, and his head rolls back. Now she knows she's in trouble. Now she knows she's done it. What does she do then? Does she go to the parents' room and use the phone? No. Because she can't tell anybody what she's done. Of course she can't. Would anybody say what they did to that little boy? No. So she stalls, and she claps, and she waves, Matty, wake up. Because she knows what she's just done. She screams, and she does everything she can upstairs. But Matty Eappen's not waking up. And I just ask you to do one thing, ladies and gentlemen. Assess the aspiring little actress over there, and whether or not she told you the truth when she said she did absolutely nothing to Matty Eappen on February 4th to cause his injuries. And make your way through this high-priced defense production with all the big blow-ups, and do one thing. Just find the truth. Because the truth is, Louise Woodward is responsible for killing Matty Eappen.
On Tuesday morning at 11:45, the case of Massachusetts versus Woodward went to the jury.
All right. Members of the jury, hearken to your verdict as recorded by the court on indictment number 97-433-001, Commonwealth versus Louise Woodward. Is the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Guilty of what?
Guilty of murder in the second degree.
Members of the jury, hearken to your verdict as recorded by the court. The jurors on their vote do say that the defendant is guilty of second-degree murder. So say you, Madam Foreperson?
Yes.
So say you all, members of the jury.
Yes.
You may be seated. Be seated.